So, welcome to Tune In Tuesday, the One Baptism of Original Christianity, Session 3, titled Whispers of the Coming Salvation. In Session 1, we answered the question, what is a ritual like baptism doing in that great list of the grand doctrines of the church? One God, one Lord, one Spirit, etc. Well, we found the answer by comparing the four lists of these 7 central doctrines that were found in Ephesians 4, 6 through 8, 1 Timothy 3:16, Hebrews 6, verse 1 and 2, and the 7 occurrences of the phrase, I would that you were not ignorant. Each list views these cardinal doctrines from a different perspective, and together they give us the big picture. Ephesians is the grand summary. 1 Timothy 3's viewpoint is regarding the great mystery and all the fulfillments and corresponding changes which came in the wind of Pentecost. Hebrews 6 is from the standpoint of the Jewish Christian church and the quote-unquote I would not that you were ignorant contributions fill in more pieces of the picture. Together, they portray the magnificent role of this doctrine of the church, that salvation truly is a great truth worthy of equal status with the rest of the cardinal doctrines. Then, in Session 2, Jesus smacked us Christians on the side of the head and commanded us to get along with our brothers, even if we disagree with them, even about baptism. Yo-ho! Now, in this session, we will take our cue from 1 Corinthians 10, which is one of the central passages for this class. Melvin and I will be returning to this section often to mine more and more gems. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1, we'll start. Moreover, brethren, I would that you should not be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat that same spiritual meat, and did all drink that same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were for our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt the Lord, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Verse 11, now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, our warning, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinks he stands on his own take heed lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above that which you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. Wherefore, practical application of the whole thing, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. Boy, oh boy, this passage is so rich with symbolism. They were baptized both in the cloud and in the sea. Well, what was that significant of? Melvin pointed out that when they passed through the Red Sea, God saved them from certain death by parting it. That was a shadow of things to come. On one side of the sea was death. On the other side, a new life. That's what baptism is like. Before, death. After, life. Mel taught we ought to be mindful of that solemn occasion, that sacred moment, when we made the decision to become born again and live for the Lord. So now we see some of the figurative significance of them being baptized in the sea. Many who understand the significance of this point to the sea and they say, "See, water baptism is the way to salvation." But I say, what about them also being baptized in the cloud? Now this is fascinating because of what the cloud represents. You see, it's easy to make the water baptism a connection. But remember back in the Gospels when water baptism was first mentioned by John the Baptist? He always followed by stating that baptism in the Spirit was greater. We are going to see the same connection here. Water and Spirit. Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers mention the pillar of the cloud often. It and the pillar of fire led the children of Israel through the wilderness. It rested upon the tabernacle. And in the multiple times that it was mentioned, more details are revealed. Look at Exodus 19:9. Exodus 19:9. And the Lord said to Moses, "Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever." And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. Exodus 24 is another occurrence. Exodus 24, verse 15 through 18. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went up into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So, we're starting to see some of the significance of the cloud. It was connected with the presence of the Lord. He spoke to Moses from the cloud. Numbers 9 is a place where the word cloud clusters. I think it's 11 times in just a few verses. Because of this, we should expect to learn a lot about the cloud in this passage. So please turn to Numbers chapter 9, verse 15. Numbers 9:15. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony, and at evening there was upon the tabernacle, as it were, the appearance of fire until the morning. So it was always. The cloud covered it, the tabernacle, by day, and the appearance of fire by night. And when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed. And in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel pitched their tents. At the commandment of the Lord, the children of Israel journeyed. And at the commandment of the Lord, they pitched. As long as the cloud abode upon the tabernacle, they rested in their tents. And when the cloud tarried long upon the tabernacle, many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord, and journeyed not. And so it was, when the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the commandment of the Lord, they abode in their tents. And according to the commandment of the Lord, they journeyed. Verse 21, and so it was, when the cloud abode from evening until morning, and that the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they journeyed. Whether it was by day or by night that the cloud was taken up, they journeyed. Or whether it was for 2 days or a month or a year, that the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, remaining thereon, the children of Israel abode in their tents, and journeyed not. But when it was taken up, they journeyed. Verse 23, at the commandment of the Lord they rested in the tents, at the commandment of the Lord they journeyed, they kept the charge of the Lord, at the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. Wow. Now, the cloud is mentioned many times in this passage. And you have to understand, the cloud was there every day. All right? It abode over the tabernacle. And it says they were under the cloud in 1 Corinthians 10. And it says they were baptized by the cloud and the sea. All right? So what can we learn about the cloud in this passage we just read? Well, where the cloud abode, they abode. It was associated with a commandment of the Lord. And then when the cloud started moving, they followed it. The cloud guided them. And then when the cloud rested on the tabernacle and stopped moving, that's where they set up camp. All right? And the tabernacle was where God was worshipped. So, these traits are also traits of the Spirit. It abode upon believers. The Spirit was a vehicle of communication. The Spirit guided believers. The Spirit was associated with worship. So you can see the connection with the cloud and with the Spirit of God. Isn't that interesting? Numbers also makes a literal connection with this association of Spirit. Look at Numbers 11, 25, 24, and 25. And Moses went out, told the people the words of the Lord, and gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them round about the tabernacle. And the Lord came down in a cloud, and spake unto him, and took of the Spirit that was upon him, and gave it to the 70 elders. And it came to pass that when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied and did not cease. So the Lord came down in a cloud. Psalms uses this, and it nails down these observations. Psalm 78, verse 13, he divided the sea and caused them to pass through. He made the waters to stand as an heap. And in the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all night with a light of fire. Then Psalms 99:7. He spake unto them in the cloudy pillar. They kept his testimonies and the ordinances that he gave them. So the cloud represents Spirit. So isn't that interesting that in 1 Corinthians 10 it says they were baptized in the cloud and in the sea. So you have both sides represented there. Isn't that interesting? Matthew 17:5 is another occurrence where God is associated with a cloud, the Spirit of God. Matthew 17:5, this is at the Transfiguration. While he yet spake, this is Jesus speaking, while he, Jesus, yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him. So, back in 1 Corinthians 10, they were baptized, quote unquote, figuratively by both the cloud and the sea. Now, I say figuratively because they didn't do a baptism ceremony in the midst of the Red Sea. Of course not. They were hot-footing it through there as quick as they could. But on one side was certain death, and on the other, life. It also was a cleansing. They left behind the influences of the idolatrous religion of the Egyptians and embraced the true God. And the cloud guided them. See? So it was a turning point in many ways. Death to life, bondage to freedom, falsehood to truth, the world to the Word. Now, Mel is going to bring out more about the cleansing aspect in his next teaching. But how were they baptized in the cloud? Were they immersed in it? No, they were under it. But since these things were a shadow of things to come, we don't get those details until we can comprehend that which cast the shadow. Who wrote Corinthians? The Apostle Paul. So he made the symbolic connection between the cloud and the presence of God's Spirit that guided them back then, and baptism in the Spirit that John and Jesus prophesied of. But how was receiving the Spirit a baptism? Well, if we consider the traits, we shall see the connections. We saw earlier the connections between the cloud and the Spirit. It abode upon the believers. It was a vehicle of communication. The Spirit guided the believers. It was associated with worship. God spoke from the cloud. Well, when it comes to death and life, the Spirit is life. When it comes to the path they followed through the sea, the spiritual guidance we receive is the path into eternity. When it comes to baptism's association with cleansing, that's what the Spirit does too. It burns up the chaff in our lives and purifies us as we obey what God tells us via the Spirit. When we obey the words of God given by the Spirit, we manifest the life that we were promised. So, when we look back on the Old Testament through the lens of the New, we can see many parallels. This is the symbolic side of the Bible that was built over centuries by separate writers and coming into focus in the New Testament. It is conclusive proof of the divine authorship of the Bible. It's God's fingerprints. Hallelujah, sock it to you. Also, in session 2, Mel mentioned 1 Peter 3, which brought in the same connection with the flood. On one side of the flood was death, and on the other side was life. 1 Peter 3 implies that the flood of water was the type, and a baptism was the antitype. Which baptism was the antitype? Well, the verse went on to say, parenthesis, not putting away the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God, close parenthesis. That's right there in that verse. But there is something else. Every other place so far that baptism has been mentioned or symbolized, both baptisms were represented somehow, water and spirit, the type and the antitype, the shadow and the body that casts it. All right? Well, where is the reference to the Spirit in the flood? The dove. Genesis 8. Genesis 8, verse 6. It came to pass at the end of the 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Verse 7, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. And he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and so she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet for another 7 days. And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was a olive leaf plucked off. Okay? So no one knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. Now, this leaf was from an olive. In the heavenly glossary, the Spirit is symbolized by a dove. So we can connect the dots. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 29, it says, the next day John saw Jesus coming in to him, and said, Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. This is he of whom I said, After me comes a man which is preferred before me, for he was before or in front of me. It's not time here, it's position. The word pro and before can be both time and position. In this case, it's position. Verse 31, And I knew him not, but that he should be made manifest to Israel. Therefore am I come baptizing with water. And John bare record, saying, I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a dove, and it abode upon him. And I knew him not, but he that sent me to baptize with water, the same said to me, Upon whom thou shalt see the Spirit descending and remaining on him, the same is he which baptizes with the Holy Ghost. And I saw and bear record that this is the Son of God. Matthew has another record of it. Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. And Jesus, when he was baptized, went straightway up out of the water, and lo, the heavens were opened unto him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending upon him like a dove, and lighting upon him. And lo, a voice from heaven saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Now, I know that some of us may be hesitant to make this connection with the dove. I understand. Many of us have been schooled in the literal interpretation of the word for most of our lives. But it's okay to make this connection because a connection has already been inferred between the flood and baptism by the Apostle Peter. So we can follow his lead and look for parallels, and if the shoe fits, then it's okay. If the shoe doesn't fit, that's okay too. Just don't squeeze stuff, all right? Noah sent out 2 birds, a raven and a dove. The raven never came back. The dove did. Noah received information from the dove. He knew the waters were abated because the dove also brought back an olive leaf. The olive tree is another symbol in the glossary of Scripture. The message of the dove's olive leaf that there was a new beginning for humanity, peace and reconciliation with God, renewal and revival. That's what the olive represents, and the dove represents the Spirit. Olive oil also was used to anoint kings, and that was a connection with the Spirit as well. So it's doubly confirmed. Spirit is doubly confirmed in the flood account. It's as clear as black and white. Ravens and doves. Isn't that interesting? The reference to spiritual things continues in 1 Corinthians 10 in verses 3 and 4. What was the spiritual meat? Manna. What was the spiritual drink? The water from the rock. What was that spiritual rock? That rock represented Christ. What did this all portend? Stay tuned to Tune In Tuesday for that one. In 1 Corinthians 10, it uses the word tupos twice for type, which gives us the clue that the prophecy picture is expanded into the uses of all those different signpost words for typology that I covered in session 1. See, since salvation and the Messiah who brings it is such a grand subject in the Bible, it's foreshadowed in many ways, even in the stars. E.W. Bullinger, in his book, Witness of the Stars, proves that the original purpose of the zodiac, it's called the Maseroth, is the Hebrew word, was to tell the story of the coming Redeemer. Today, the 12 signs of the zodiac have been hijacked by imposters who purport they predict our lives. But since all the ancient zodiacs, the Chinese and the Chaldean and the Egyptian, all have the same 12 signs, and they are in the same order, that very fact points that they had a common ancestor. But the ancient original meaning of the 12 signs, people think it might be lost, but actually it was not lost. It's actually preserved in the star names of the stars themselves that make up the constellations. And these star names tell the story of a coming Redeemer. E.W. Bullinger, in his book, Witness of the Stars, states the following, quote, "These pictures were designed to preserve, expound, and perpetuate the one first great promise and prophecy of Genesis 3:15, that all hope for man, all hope for creation, was bound up in a coming Redeemer, one who should be born of a woman, who should first suffer and afterwards gloriously triumph, one who should first be wounded by that great enemy who was the cause of all sin and sorrow and death, but who should finally crush the head of that old serpent, the devil. These ancient star pictures reveal this coming one." Bullinger goes on to say, "They set forth the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow. Altogether, there are 48 of them, made up of 12 signs, each sign containing 3 constellations. These may be divided into 3 great books. Each book contains 4 chapters or signs, and each chapter contains 3 sections or constellations. Each book, it's like the 4 Gospels, sets forth its peculiar aspect of the coming one, beginning with the promise of his coming and ending with the destruction of the enemy," unquote. So, I'm going to give you a summary from Bullinger's book, An Express Train View of the Heavens, of the prophecy told in the stars of the coming Redeemer. And this was the mnemonic that was used by the prophets of old to tell the story of the ages, because before the word was written on with alphabetic writing, it was told in the stars and memorized. The story of redemption of the coming Redeemer was memorized by the prophets, and all of these constellations were their memory pegs, their mnemonic. So the first book about the coming Redeemer, the suffering of Christ, chapter 1, is the prophecy of the promised seed of the woman, which is the virgin, a woman bearing a branch in her right hand and an ear of corn in her left. It's the promised seed of the woman. So that's Virgo. Then the other 3 constellations associated with Virgo are Coma, Centaurus, and Bootes. Coma is the desired. It's a woman holding up a child, the desired of all nations. Then the centaur is holding a spear that's piercing a victim, and that's the sin offering. And then Bootes is a man walking bearing a branch. He's called Arcturus, which means he is coming. So this is part of the story the prophets would tell of the coming Redeemer. Chapter 2 is the Redeemer's atoning work. This is Libra, which is scales, weighing, the price deficient balanced by the price which covers. Then the three constellations that are part of this are Crux, the cross endured, Lupus, the victim slain, and Corona, the crown bestowed. Chapter 3. I'll give you this in a handout if you want it. Chapter 3 of the stars is the Redeemer's conflict, which is Scorpio. Scorpio is the scorpion seeking to wound but being trodden underfoot. Serpens is the first constellation associated with Scorpio, which is the serpent struggling with the man. Ophiuchus is the man grasping the serpent, struggling with the enemy. And the last constellation in this triad is Hercules, the mighty man, who is kneeling on one knee, humbled by the conflict, but holding aloft the tokens of victory with his foot on the head of the dragon. So that's the prophecy of the coming Messiah. Then chapter 4 is Redeemer's triumph, which is Sagittarius, the archer, going forth, conquering and to conquer. The three constellations associated with Sagittarius are Lyra, Ara, and Draco. Lyra is the harp, which is praise for the conqueror. Ara is the altar, which is the fire prepared for his enemies. And Draco, the dragon, is the old serpent, the devil, cast down from heaven. So that's the first book. The second book is the Redeemed. So in the first book we have the Redeemer's sufferings. The second book is the Redeemed. The result of the Redeemer's sufferings is he redeems the redeemed. Chapter 1, their blessings procured. This is Capricorn, the great atonement slain for the redeemed. And the three constellations that go with it are Sagitta, Aquila, and Definius. Sagitta is the arrow of God sent forth. Aquila is the smitten one falling. And Delphinius is a dolphin, the dead one rising again. These are all prophecy pictures that would be the mnemonic as the prophets of old told of the story of redemption that's coming. Chapter 2, their blessings insured, is Aquarius, the water bearer, the living waters of blessing poured forth for the redeemed. And the three constellations that go with this are Piscis Australis, Pegasus, and Cygnus. So Piscis Australis is the southern fish. The blessings are bestowed. Pegasus, the winged horse. The blessings are coming quick. And Cygnus, the swan. The blesser is surely returning. Chapter 3 of Book 2. Their blessings in abeyance, which is Pisces, the fish. The redeemed blessing. And they have the band, Andromeda, and Cepheus, which are the three constellations that go with this. The band is binding the great enemy, the sea monster. Andromeda is the chained woman, the redeemed in their bondage and affliction. And Cepheus is the king, their redeemer coming to rule. And then chapter 4, their blessings consummated and enjoyed, which is Aries, the ram, or the lamb that was slain and prepared for the victory. The three constellations that go with this are Cassiopeia, Cetus, and Perseus. Cassiopeia is the enthroned woman, the captive delivered and preparing for her husband, the Redeemer. Cetus is the great enemy bound, and Perseus, the breaker, is the deliverer. He's delivering his redeemed. So that's the second book. And finally, the third book in the heavens is the Redeemer in his second coming, the glory that should follow. So chapter 1 is the Messiah coming to judge all the earth, and that's Taurus, the bull. Messiah is coming to rule. And the three constellations that go with this are Orion, Eridanus, and Arigia. And Orion is the light breaking forth in the person of the Redeemer. Eridanus is the river, wrath breaking forth on his enemies, flowing out. And Ariga is the shepherd, the safety for the redeemed in the day of that wrath. Chapter 2 of the last book is Messiah's reign as Prince of Peace. And Gemini, the twins, the twofold nature of the king. Lepus, the enemy, is the first constellation that goes with this. Lepus, the enemy trodden underfoot. The second constellation, Canis Major, the dog, or Sirius, the coming of the glorious Prince of Princes, and Canis Minor, or Procyon, the exalted Redeemer. The last two books are left. Chapter 3, last two chapters. The Messiah redeemed in his redeemed possessions is Cancer, the possessions held fast. Ursa Minor, the lesser bear, is the lesser sheepfold, and Ursa Major, the great bear, is the greater sheepfold and the flock. And Argo, the ship, is the redeemed pilgrims safe at home. And finally, chapter 4 of the third book, the Messiah's consummated triumph, is Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah, aroused for the rending of the enemy. The three constellations that go with this are Hydra, Crater, and Corvus. Hydra is the serpent, that old serpent the devil destroyed. Crater, the cup of divine wrath poured out upon him. And Corvus, the raven, the birds of prey devouring him. Well, what's really interesting is my father was an amateur astronomer, and in Boy Scouts, whenever we had campfires, one of the things that my father would do if the sky was clear is he would give us a tour of the stars, and we would start out with the Big Dipper, which is very easy to see, and you can utilize the parts of the Big Dipper to create imaginary lines to follow across the sky. So the two stars on the ladle part of the Dipper, if you go up, they lead, I think, the Polaris. And if you follow the handle around, it goes around and you lead it to others. My father would show us Cassiopeia. There's like a big W high in the sky. He'd show us Arcturus, which is a yellow star. You could barely see it if you squinted. You could see the yellow color. And Betelgeuse was red. Sirius would show us Orion's belt and all of those things. So I'm very familiar with this, and I think that's exactly what Abraham would do. He would tell the story of redemption at night around the campfire and pointed out all of these different constellations, and he would go through the whole story and utilize the star shapes and all that as a mnemonic to remember all of the details. That's really something. This before the word was written, but it was told. This is fascinating. So, This is another illustration of the great theme that we are covering in this class, the theme of salvation. It was the story of redemption told across the sky. And the same is told throughout the Bible. And that's done in several ways. The next way we're going to cover is typology. But we're going to do that after we take a break. Bless you.